Welcome to the Emerald City Hockey Podcast. Join RJ and Dylan as they discuss each week's Seattle Kraken news and top stories from around the league.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Emerald City Hockey Podcast. Let's not beat around the bush at all on this one, RJ. Let's just get right into it and talk about this week's set of games. 3 games this week and, no wins this week, unfortunately. First time in a little while we've had to go through that. We get, start things off back with that Penguins game. That brutal 6-1 loss to the Penguins that, when we went and did the post-game live, kind of a different reaction from majority of the people who were there with us versus yours and I opinion of, this was kind of just a bad luck game at the beginning, 3 fluky goals, all going off Kraken players, and after that, you just kind of got to write the game off because it's hard to come back from a situation like that and play well and stay in it and try to keep your head together when something like that happens. A lot of people, though, were just kind of disappointed. I think everybody was having flashbacks to, certainly the Colorado game was brought up a decent amount.
Yes.
From the end of the losing streak. So with like a week's worth of perspective on that game, do you still feel the same way that it was just kind of a fluky thing? Or do you think that maybe there were some signs of regression from the Kraken there that we just didn't want to see?
Well, I stand by, what we said at the time with that the start was fluky. Mm-hmm. That, those 3 goals all off of Kraken sticks, bodies, what have you. That's just really tough. And I think Grubauer even talked about it, after I think it was the next game where he just said, those goals happen, mm-hmm. whether it's off a body or whatever. They usually just don't happen 3 all in the first few minutes. Just kind of had that bad luck cluster there. So I stand by that as far as, it just being unlucky. But I think what was more telling was just kind of the response and the way the whole game went. Yes, the Kraken put on a push afterward, but they didn't get a whole lot to show for it. And really, they weren't able to put on much of a push in the third. They didn't, they didn't really do anything to kind of claw their way back into the game in any kind of meaningful sense. Mm-hmm. And so looking at that, it may probably show some signs of what we were about to see then in the Winnipeg game. Where it just kind of everything just died slowly, as they get shut out. But yeah, it's certainly something the team viewed differently, at least like being around and hearing the way that Hackstall was talking about it, where, he mentioned just the effort was unacceptable for what we're looking at from our mm-hmm. team, just can't happen, and how he worked them very hard in practice the very next day, we can't let this happen again. And I don't think that he's felt the same way about the Kraken's effort in the 2 games following that. Yeah.
And, I think I'm kind of in the same boat. I stand by the flukiness of it and how that can, completely throw you. Now, you could also argue, right, all that happens right away, first 5 minutes of the game. At some point, you should be able to get, back into it, even at the end of that period, right? Between periods 1 and 2, you should be able to come back out in the second period and play well, regardless of what had happened. And that certainly wasn't the case, really. I mean, I guess you kick off that period with a Eberle goal, but you certainly don't finish that period strong. I think, thinking about it personally, there was probably some elements of just not wanting to be like, oh no, here we go again. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like I wouldn't say I was like desperately grasping at straws, but I was definitely putting on some rose-colored glasses and try to be like, yeah, I mean, it's all right, maybe, it's at least an explanation. So many of the other games that, rough games that the Kraken have had, haven't really had an explanation. That at least was an explanation, an excuse, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, that was just a bad game. We saw they struggled containing Pittsburgh's aggressiveness from the Pittsburgh forwards. That was an issue for the defense throughout the game. You saw that they struggled with the kind of aggressiveness of the defensemen. The Penguins defenders too just struggled with zone entries and stuff like that. Kind of similar to the Tampa Bay game. So that was again something that, was talked about a lot on the post game live, which was, okay, this is clearly a problem for the Kraken. Our team's going to start using this against us. I'll hold to the fact that not every team can play that style and get away with it. To be frankly honest, I'm surprised the Penguins.
It takes a lot of talent and a lot of buy-in, that's for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm pretty surprised that the Penguins kind of get away with it as much as they do, to be perfectly honest. So that was my first question to you, is I don't think that, every team can just be like, okay, guys, we're playing Seattle. We got to, do this. I just don't think it's that kind of thing. But certainly it's going to be a problem as the Kraken play those teams. What do you think the Kraken should do different when they play teams like that, where ahead of time, okay, they've got an aggressive defense, they're going to try to defend their blue line, keep us from entering the zone, easily. What kind of approach do you think the Kraken should take in those kinds of situations?
I think they need to, one, move around a little bit more. And I was asked kind of at the time during the game, how do you counter this? They're all over them. And one of the things that you can do is have players, building up some speed before they get the puck, coming out of your own zone and making these short passes to guys that already have speed built up. And then they can hit the line, with some speed there, back off the defenseman a little bit. It's hard to kind of wrap up someone and really pester them and harass them when they're moving fast. It's very easy to do when they're stationary. So I think that starts with having these short passes ready to go and, kind of planned out where the guys are, especially in the breakout. One things I saw in the game was that you just have Kraken players not really moving anywhere. They just be stationary where they were, and it's easy for guys to be all over them. And there was no one else off the puck really giving them an outlet, really moving with any kind of speed. It was easy for the Penguins to kind of just lock them down. So I think just speed off the puck is a good way to counter that. What do you think, Dylan?
No, I agree with that. And, one of the things that we saw through that game, through the Winnipeg game, was a lot of, okay, we're starting to transition, and a forward will enter the neutral zone with the puck, and then for whatever reason pass it back to a defenseman. Like you're starting forward momentum, pausing it, taking a step back essentially, letting everybody bunch up at the blue line, and then trying to make something happen when you can't have any momentum. You can't, kind of get the defense back on their heels a little bit, or maybe even creep behind them, ideally. So I do think that it's in some ways it's a system thing, and I think in other ways it's just a mentality thing, just to kind of have that killer instinct and confidence to be like, hey, I can take this puck up through the neutral zone. Maybe I'm going to have somebody pestering me, but I trust in my ability to get through that. Or I trust in my ability to get through that defenseman up there. Or I trust in my ability to make this pass in the neutral zone, and I'm not going to turn it over. I think that's ultimately a lot of it. Is it comes down to being confident in your abilities, trusting in yourself, and trusting in your teammates to make the play. So I think that's ultimately what's going to need to happen for the Kraken when playing teams like that. Again, shouldn't run into them too often, but certainly if you're talking about, okay, they come back, maybe make the playoffs, and then all of a sudden you're facing a team like that in the playoffs, that's you need to have answers.
For sure.
Yeah. So, but I think those were really the main couple takeaways from the Penguins game as far as what they struggled with and what they could work on. Looking then at the Winnipeg game. Now that game was just brutal to watch. Only 3-0, but I felt like it could also have been, it could have gone a couple different ways actually, but to me it felt like a much worse game because I guess you didn't have the excuse of the 3 goals at the beginning being kind of fluky. In this one, I think the biggest thing for me was how much in the defensive zone, the Kraken just struggled in general, but how much they gave up like kind of a net front presence and the slot really. They just let Winnipeg converge there, which is exactly what Winnipeg wanted to do.
Yes, they played really right into the way the Jets love to play. And the turnovers didn't help either. It's tough to, defend the slot when all of a sudden, it's coming back the other way at you fast. Or, I think of that Susi turnover behind the net where you've got a guy free in the slot because 2 seconds ago you had the puck and you didn't have to worry about that. The defensive miscues that really looked a lot like the ones that we saw during that awful losing streak kind of reared their ugly head again. And it was just really bad to see because, I thought those things were, kind of gone. We were hoping that was all in the past. But in that Winnipeg game, yeah, just defensively, they were kind of back to their old form from when they were losing games. And offensively, they were just kind of sticking to the outside and letting a team like Winnipeg just kind of wear them down, which is, again, how the Jets want to play.
Yeah, a lot of, potential opportunities kind of died on the vine for the Kraken in that one. Yeah, so one of the things that I brought up then after the Columbus game that, again, relates to this and relates to certainly their defensive struggles and stuff, which was there are certainly times, maybe not so much in the Winnipeg game, but like in the Columbus game, and we could talk about it more when we focus on that game. The Kraken defensemen might do a good job. Let's say one of them has to follow somebody behind the net or at least below the goal line, right? So that's their responsibility. The other defender is taking up somebody that's maybe more immediate net front, right? So they're bodied up there. A lot of times for this Kraken team, we see the opposing team manages to get a forward that can then kind of come into the slot, maybe 5 feet out from the goalie, 5-10 feet out from the goalie, and that person is always wide open. And we've seen so many goals throughout this season scored on the Kraken from players in that position. So to me, that kind of signals that there's an issue with the forwards back checking. That's kind of the center's responsibility to kind of guard in there, kind of play a little lower in the defensive zone. Usually you kind of same takeaway.
Yeah. And one of the things I noticed in that regard is that when I look at some of those goals from where the third forward is setting up close to the net, like what you described, I look for the nearest Kraken forward back because you think, okay, that should be the center. That should be the guy who's there to cover him. And it's, that forward for the Kraken is often not the center, or, the guy who's playing center on that line, which is, a little bit confusing. But for a lot of goals against, it seems like the first forward back is not the center. I don't know if that's a systems thing. I see it enough that it looks like it might be a systems thing. But I don't know. It seems like there's some confusion there. I mean, one of the things that's a benefit when you have the center having that responsibility is just, it's always the center. It's always this guy. It's very clear who should be on that third forward. But if you're kind of handing off that responsibility, if it's a different wing, based on the side, it can probably generate some situations there where the forwards are a bit confused and it's hard to pick up that guy.
Right. And I noticed that too. I've been trying to kind of watch to see what exactly it is, where the forwards are, especially the centers. And basically the centers end up kind of all over the place. Like it seems like the system is that the center isn't going to cover the slot there, but it doesn't seem like there's necessarily a system as to where the center is then 100% of the time elsewhere, and who, which winger is responsible for kind of coming down and covering for it. It's just kind of like this no man's land in their defensive coverage that they're just kind of ceding to other teams, which makes no sense because it's like a prime goal scoring position. Like it's
yes, and an area that the Kraken's goalies have had difficulty stopping the puck from as well.
Yeah, especially that's why it's becoming a big issue. And I guess it's really surprising because you look at this team and you look, Yanni Gourde, excellent two-way player. Wenberg, we know he can be a really, really good two-way player too. Like these are guys who have had defensive assignments before. We know that they can handle it. We know that they're smart about it. We know that they play well back there. And for some reason, this is a problem. I think that also speaks to this, it being more of a system problem rather than a player issue, just because these guys are good enough, you would think that they would be handling some of those opportunities.
Yeah, and sometimes it makes sense to have a system like that if it fits your personnel. I mean, Vegas comes to mind where, your shut down forward is Mark Stone, who's a wing, and kind of down the line, you kind of skip at center a little bit and you have more talent on the wings. That might make a little bit more sense, but given the Kraken's personnel, it just doesn't.
Exactly. So that was definitely an issue that, I think needed to be talked about when it comes to this Winnipeg game. Also kind of struggled with Winnipeg's size, especially defensively, which, we talked about in the post game. Very odd given the Kraken have size, especially on defense. it was weird that they kind of struggled with that. They lost a lot of battles, or certainly like kind of positional inside positions and stuff in their own zone. That's a little bit of a question mark for me. Power play was horrible.
Yeah, we can get to the power play. Yeah, I mean 0 for 5. I think they only two shots on goal, 3 shots on goal throughout the entire game on the power play. Not a lot, and against a PK unit that was ranked second worst in the NHL going into the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was rough. Definitely a forgettable performance, but that to me is ultimately where the whole okay, we're getting ready to try to enter the Jets zone. Let's pass it backwards to a defenseman though, just because. Like that happened so many times, and it just kept them from getting anything established in the offensive zone on those power plays. And you need that if you're going to score on a power play. You need to possess it. You need to be cycling the puck around, getting defenders out of position, getting the goaltender moving laterally if you can, all of that stuff. So that was something rough to see, and a big contributing factor to why they lost that game. And then moving on to Saturday night against Columbus, overtime loss. But I think the big story, and it seemed like the big story for a lot of people in the post-game chat too, was the comeback and getting a point out of that game.
Yeah, it was very important. I mean, it's something that really we hadn't seen a whole lot from the Kraken this season. I mean, after that second period where it was 4-1 and things looked hopeless, I remember getting some comments on Twitter saying like, man, it just feels like the Kraken, if they give up the first goal, they don't, it's game's over. You know what I mean? Once you do that, there's no coming back. They don't have it in them to do that. And certainly has felt that way most of the season. And it felt that way again, in that last game against Columbus. And then I think we saw something truly different from them, though. I mean, a kind of response that we hadn't really seen from them so far this season. It was just good to see that they're capable of doing that.
Right. And I think part of what we saw that was different about them wasn't necessarily that, they didn't quit. Because there's been plenty of games where we've said, hey, look, they lost, maybe even by 2 or 3, but it didn't look like they ever gave up on the game. Good on them. Good on the crowd, right? It's plenty of times Climate Pledge Arena has been right there for them, even in those rough situations. What really felt different to me in that third period was once you get that first goal, it felt like, hey, okay, I think this is doable. And then you get that geeky goal, 22 seconds later or whatever, and you're like, we got this. Like the team had been playing well. They played really well. First game in a long time, they came out of the gates and looked really strong. Really the first time since the beginning of the season. Remember, this team was a team that could start off games. They just weren't getting, lucky with chances, and then they would slowly fall apart as the game went. That's how we all started a couple months ago. I know it seems like a long time, everybody. But they came out of the gates super strong, dominate. First, it was like 8-1 shot difference in the first 10 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, they didn't give up a shot on goal for 9:55, I think it was, almost 10 minutes into the game.
Yeah, so huge difference to the previous couple games, and certainly all those games during the longer losing streak last month. And then to come back out in the third like that and have momentum in a way that felt believable and inevitable. Like, okay, this was going to happen. And just as I was starting to be like, okay, well, maybe it's not going to happen because time's actually running out. Like, it felt so much like, okay, it's going to happen. And then finally I was like, well, you know what? It's been like 11 and a half minutes. Maybe you got to get something going here if we're going to finish this one off. Vince Dunn gets that done. And ties the game up at 4 to ultimately send it to overtime. Had to survive a little bit of a last minute scare there against Columbus. Couldn't quite get the puck out of the zone. But to me, that was my big takeaway. Started off strong, which was important to see after the previous 2 games, and then just that feeling of we got this, it's gonna happen. Just don't really remember too many times where I've believed that much. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was there at the game. I was feeling it, and I think the crowd kind of felt it too. It felt, yeah, we're gonna do this. Yeah. And I think part of that is also just scoring earlier in the third. A lot of these pushes the Kraken have put on have been, you get the first goal in the series of goals when it's already kind of too late, when you're in miracle territory. Whereas the Kraken went and got 2 goals in the first basically 4 minutes of the period and left themselves a lot of time, to go get another one, which helps.
For sure. Then we have overtime. So Kraken 0 for 3 in overtime. Again, big topic of conversation in the post-game show. Everybody, what's wrong with them in overtime? What's wrong with them in overtime? So I guess, RJ, let's talk about what's wrong with them in overtime. Now, my first thing is to say it's kind of a small sample size. It's only 3 games. And it's 3 games in a 3-on-3 overtime setting where the tiniest of bounces can make a difference. Somebody, loses an edge one time, that makes a massive difference. Like, they are a little bit more inherently random. So for me, I don't know that I'm sounding any alarm bells at all, really, just because of the small sample size.
Yeah, and you have to take that into account. I mean, it's, 3-on-3 overtime. It certainly has the randomness to it, and 3 games. You see longer skids than that just kind of feel random, but there definitely have been some mistakes in that time that you can point to.
Yeah, and this one certainly not an exception.
Probably the most of all of them.
Yeah, where you could argue all 3 players on the ice made a mistake for the Kraken on this one. You have the awkward handoff between Alexiak and Wenberg that ultimately leaves Jake Bean just kind of wide open to just skate in with the puck and have the time and space to choose his shot. You've got Johansson doing something. I mean, I don't even know what he's... That's the one that's most confusing. Like, I can understand the awkward handoff between the other two, but, like, do you have any idea what he was thinking there?
None whatsoever. It's also just rare. I mean, how often do you see a guy that close to his own goalie screening his own goalie in 3-on-3 overtime? If you kind of have to draw up a situation that leads a player into that spot in that circumstance, I don't know how you do it. It was so awkward too, kind of leaning down and like kind of half trying to get out of the way, realizing he was in a bad spot, but not making things any better. I have no explanation for it. And I think Grubauer himself was pretty shocked right after the goal. He just looks over at Johansson like,
what was
that?
Yeah. No, and what's, I guess, most surprising for me was that it was Johansson. Like, he's a veteran player, generally knows what he's doing. You know what I mean? Like, He's been around, he's seen everything, been a part of, many different teams, many different systems. He's a smart player. So for him to be the person doing that versus maybe a young guy like, Alex True or Morgan Geekie or something, where you could kind of chalk it up to, okay, well, they're not used to this situation and whatever, right? But for him, I don't know that kind of excuse holds.
No, it doesn't apply.
Yeah, so that was just kind of a mess, is, I guess, the best way to put it. Certainly the most honest way to put it. But yeah, as far as things in overtime for the Kraken, I think using guys like Yanni Gourde, using your more kind of creative guys that work well with space and the time, that 3-on-3, kind of making an effort for some of those guys. I like to see, McCann in some of those situations, and then even some guys like, Donskoy. Super creative player, can play fast, can kind of just come up with stuff on the fly and get it done. I think those are the guys you got to focus on with your 3-on-3 packages for those kinds of things, because ultimately those are the kind of guys that can score goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as much as I like, what maybe like a Wenberg or Johansson brings, they're not really a game breaker type of guy that, is going to push you over the edge and score a goal. They might help you in that cycle game once you're kind of set up and just working with possession of the puck. And we saw the Kraken have some of that in the Detroit game, but they just didn't have anyone who could kind of break through. And Yanni Gourde looked like the only guy who even had a chance at doing that.
Right, and we'll get to why Yanni Gourde wasn't there in just one second. Yes. The final thing I'll say as far as the overtime losses, because you brought up the Detroit game, is as far as shootouts go, really the only thing you can do is you can practice it, I guess as much as you want, but you shouldn't dedicate too much time to it. No. And then the other thing is, just try to make sure that, your video scout, your pro scouts and stuff kind of have reads on goaltenders and what their tendencies are in those situations, and make sure the assistant coaches have that for the bench. So when it's going to a shootout, you can kind of give the guys a heads up. But
Yeah,
otherwise,
doing your homework helps.
Yeah, otherwise there's not too much you can do for shootout opportunities. So
I just want to get this on the record real quick, though. Have Jamie Alexiak shoot the shootout. I was watching him do breakaway practice. Like, he's got some sneaky good hands. I just want to get that where it's recorded so I can go back to it if he ever gets to shoot, because I think he's going to score if he does.
Yes, and that would just be awesome too. Like,
yeah,
it would be awesome. I mean, we've kind of seen his hands, right? All those times he'll carry the puck into the offensive zone and kind of make moves towards the net. He likes to drive the net and then maybe make a move there. So
yeah, that's true.
Hasn't quite pulled one off yet so far this year, but
he's got to do the between his legs move. I saw him do it in practice. I don't know that he'd ever have that situation to do in a game, but he pulled it off. He scored on Joey Decor doing that. So
wow,
I would love to see that.
That is, I mean, that's amazing sounding, actually. All right, so Yanni Gord out, Blackwell out, Shahan out, assistant coach Leach out, all COVID. You know, we got Giordano back this week, just to lose everybody else. It seems like.
Yeah, it's been rough, and it was kind of right before the Columbus game that it felt like things were trending that way again. I mean, we got an email, the morning of the game saying, out of an abundance of caution, we're going to do all today's media availabilities via Zoom. They didn't say that any players were on COVID protocol, but you kind of could read between the lines and know what was going to happen. And yeah, sure enough, as morning skate goes, oh, look, there's a bunch of guys missing. And a lot of them end up on COVID protocol.
Yeah. And so again, Kraken, no stranger to this situation. I don't really think any NHL team is at this point. Everybody's had to go through, some level of it. It does seem to be hanging around the Kraken a little bit longer than maybe for some other teams, affecting more guys. And so, I don't know. I was trying to think of like a question to ask about it or a way of talking about it, but like, do you think COVID is a bigger issue for the Kraken than it is for other teams? And if so, do you think it's because they're not doing something right? Like, it's kind of hard, or is it just kind of random and it's just happening to them a little bit more, maybe?
I would lean toward the side of randomness. And you're right. I think there's not really any other question you can ask. It's difficult to deal with. I mean, being there for all the media stuff, I see, the protocols, and I mean, all the media and everything, we're vaccinated. I think a lot of us have our boosters, it's one of those, and, they're pretty safe about things. We're all wearing masks all the time. They're generally pretty good about that. And as far as I know, on the media side of it, no one, has had it at all recently. I don't think that's where any of it's come from. So that's just kind of what I see on a day to day. So I don't think it's that. I don't know. It's tough because with COVID, all it takes is one case and it can just go around, and even kind of be a little bit delayed, like we saw, and when it gets to people. So yeah, as far as when they start experiencing symptoms, and then when you can pull them off and get them away from everyone. So it's kind of difficult to answer, but I guess I'd lean more toward the just randomness side, but it has hit the Kraken pretty hard. I think also the timing of it has been tough, especially before opening night and, on road trips, and then, hitting your captain, cause it's kind of random as far as which players get it. And just key players, Yanni Gord. I mean, they've had some really good players out.
Right, and Blackwell and Shahan were playing really well in the bottom six too. Going into that, really unfortunate. And yeah, when it hits
attacking one position group, then like the forwards. You know what I mean? You could probably afford a little bit on defense, and yet.
It's like, hey, centers, you're up. It's just the way it was. It seems like so. It is an unfortunate situation. Again, I think I'm with you. I think I lean towards the randomness thing. More so than anything. I mean, it is something going around all over the place, new variants constantly popping up, it seems like. And, again, other teams are dealing with it too. It's not like the Kraken are the exception to the rule here. But looking kind of ahead to the Olympics, because I think, COVID is still the number one question everyone has as far as the NHL participating in the Olympics, which players now will be participating in the Olympics, and maybe some players choosing not to. I mean, Robin Lehner obviously already said he would not be, just because basically if you're at the Olympics and you test positive, you're under China's rules as far as what you have to do, and I believe it's a 5-week quarantine situation. And so, Robin Leonard was like, look, I talked about it with, my people, and we decided for my mental health, it's going to be best if I don't go, because the threat of that happening and then me being stuck in Beijing for 5 weeks is not worth it, basically. It's not worth it for him, for his mental health. I 1,000% understand where he's coming from.
Oh, for sure.
I am on board with that. And really, since he brought it up, that's been a question that I think a lot of NHL players are kind of grappling with, as you have, Omicron going around now, as teams are still, fairly regularly getting guys to go on new COVID protocols, whether it's because of close contacts or because they're contracting it, right? I think it's becoming slightly, it's a bigger and bigger issue. More and more teams, the NHL obviously as a whole, and then I think individually players are really starting to ask themselves, how much is the Olympics worth it to me to potentially, have to go through all that personally, how that'll affect my NHL team, right? Obviously, if you're stuck in China for 5 weeks, the NHL is going to get back to doing things and you're not going to be there. I think it's a lot of questions. So let's just kind of answer them. I guess we should start with the biggest one, which is, at this point in time, do you think the NHL is still committed to going to the Olympics?
Well, I think, the NHL, if you look at it from the league's perspective, from Bettman's perspective, it's not something they really wanted to do in the first place.
Yeah.
So I think it's always been a situation of, can we get away with not going? How much backlash will there be from the players? And I think there might kind of be this internal hope, within some circles of the league that, hopefully, I don't know, maybe the players will get scared off by this quarantine stuff and we'll have enough of them not want to go, and then we don't have to go. And which is kind of what we wanted to do all along. Because, as has been well documented, the push for NHL players to play in the Olympics has been driven by the players. I mean, that's just something that the players really, really wanted. And if it's not something that they want as strongly, given some of the other things they'd have to deal with, well, then it becomes a situation where the league probably has a lot of incentive to back out.
Yeah, we talked about this kind of before the season started, that yes, the NHL kind of made it, pretty clear that they didn't want to have to do it, but they were going to anyway, right? For the players' sake and for, everybody's sake, the TV partners, all that stuff, right? So yes, I agree. Any chance they get to get out of it, I think they're going to take. One of the other questions, I guess, as far as that goes is, we've seen already some teams have to push back games and stuff because of COVID. Now, they didn't last too long, those stretches, as far as having to put off games and stuff. So it wasn't quite enough where it was going to be like, oh, well, Ottawa, we had to push back so many of their games that, they're going to have to play through that Olympic break. So I guess we can't go to the Olympics, guys, which I think, again, they were maybe hoping for in a weird way, was they were hoping that would happen to, a handful of teams, and it would mean, okay, look, we left that as kind of also a buffer period where if we needed to fill in games, we could fill in games. I don't know that it quite got to that point where they're going to need to do that. So yeah, I think, as far as we know, the NHL is still going. Like, right.
I mean, yeah, that is, as far as today is concerned, yeah, the plan is that they are going. So yeah, that should be mentioned loud and clear.
Right. But I do think that the more we hear about it, the more that the situation is going on in the NHL, as far as it being, a regular thing, guys seeing that it's a regular thing, that it can happen to anyone at any time, kind of no matter how careful you are, it can still happen. I think certainly that, and maybe the more they learn about the situation of actually going over there and what it could all mean, I think, I wouldn't be surprised if we hear a couple other players make the decision not to go just because of that.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me either. And I want to give credit to Robin Leonard really quick for kind of coming out in advance of this, well in advance, and, kind of being a leader and being like, look, this is what I've chosen to do, but these are things that I had to consider and things that other players are going to have to consider. I think, having him do that when he did has given a lot of other players kind of more time and more opportunity to really consider, okay, do I want to do this? What is this going to mean if I do get COVID? And really, even if they go and want to go, at least be aware of exactly what they're getting themselves into. And, that just continues with the theme of Robin Leonard kind of being a leader on a lot of these issues, especially pertaining to mental health. And, kind of showing other players, okay, this is something that you're going to, might have to worry about. So I just want to give credit to him for that.
Yeah, 1,000%. He has proven. I mean, he's certainly the most vocal of the players as far as sticking up for players at this point. You would assume he's almost like a high up official at the PA or something. Like he's kind of he does their job for them in a lot of ways.
Association, yeah.
He really is. He kind of cuts through the BS a lot of the times in those situations and just says is like, yeah, no, this is how it is, everybody, and it's a problem. We need to fix it. And it is hard to be the person who does that. And yes, he deserves a lot of credit for doing it when he does it. Last question as it relates to this, as we'll kind of go into the next bit about talking about the Olympics, which is more Kraken specific. Do you think, just given the amount of COVID issues that the Kraken have dealt with, do you think anybody in the Kraken would be, obviously, I'm sure the team itself would love if the players didn't go, just because they don't want to potentially risk losing anybody for an extended period of time. But do you think the fact that the Kraken, so many players have had it and have had to go through it here in, better circumstances where you could still be around your family potentially and all that kind of stuff, do you think anybody there might be some sentiment amongst Kraken players that, hey, I'm not sure I want to, go.
Right. I think they would certainly have, pretty good information as far as at least what that entails quarantining here. And maybe even a little bit more insight from Mark Giordano, their captain, who, had to stay in Tampa for a while after that. So he couldn't be with the team. And, it's not China, but it's, not home. So, that's another experience that I think Kraken players are going to have heard a lot about. And yeah, I think that's going to, impact their decision a little bit. It's hard to know what exactly they think of what they've heard. We only hear little bits, in the media basically about how the COVID, like, oh, I didn't have it too bad, or yeah, it was pretty rough. And, you don't get into the details of kind of what quarantine was like too much. But certainly the players, I'm sure, have gotten into the details of it kind of with each other.
Yeah, I would expect conversations are being had. But speaking of that, transitioning to our next topic, which is, looking ahead to the Olympics, what Kraken players we think could be going. So, it's a question that pops up from time to time on Twitter for us or on, the post-game lives and stuff. We talked about it, earlier in the season. You wrote that great article for the website about it. But we thought, now kind of seems like a good time to revisit it. We're, getting closer to the end of the year, getting closer to the Olympics. Certainly getting closer to whenever, deadline the NHL has to really commit to it or not. So let's go ahead and talk about who we think is going to be, joining Olympic teams. Do you want to kind of run down, the guarantees, so to speak, first, and we can talk about them?
I mean, that's kind of the way I structured this article that I wrote back in September. So it was kind of even before training camp had started, just looking at their past performance, who I thought might be in play. And I tried to include everyone who I thought really kind of had even an outside chance of making their team's roster. So we'll kind of just go through those guys, and I put them in order of likelihood. So I guess the first shoe in here is Philipp Grubauer for Team Germany. I know he's had a rough season this year, but realistically, he was already, I think, named to the German team. He was one of those first players named. So he's on the team. Nothing that he could do playing this season was going to keep him off of the team. He's the best German-born goalie ever. So, they're going to rely on him quite a bit, given that, they're going to have some tough teams in their group, and they're going to need him to make a lot of saves.
Okay, before you move on, should Kraken fans be worried about that? About Germany leaning on him? Already he's playing more than I think most of us thought he would, or maybe wanted him to, because Drieger's been injured a lot. Do you think that's something that Kraken fans should be worried about, which is he's not going to be getting a break over the Olympic break, because he's going to be there and have to play basically every minute for that team?
That's a good question, and I think they should. It's not ideal. I mean, you're already having to lean on Grubauer as the Kraken, heavier than you would like, given Drieger's injuries. And yeah, he's going to go right back at it and play some more games. I expect him to play every game for Germany that they can get him in. I don't think there's going to be much of a goaltending competition there. Maybe you get like Actually, I don't even know if Grice is going to make the team. Maybe you get whichever other goalie in there for a game, but they're going to be leaning heavily on him. And it's going to matter to him a lot, obviously. He's going to be very motivated to represent his country and to do well. Yeah, but I don't know that it's going to have the best impact for the Kraken. I guess if he continues to play as poorly as he has been, maybe you just hope that it's some kind of shakeup that, maybe having a different team in front of him just lets him see things a little differently, a little clearer, and he kind of comes back better, or maybe with some confidence if he does well. But I certainly don't like just how much hockey Philip Grubauer is going to have to play this season, it looks like.
Exactly. I was going to say, maybe if, Drieger is truly healthy and ready to go, maybe then, kind of post-Olympics, you can kind of ride Drieger for a little while and try to rest Grubauer if you're the Kraken. But yes, that's something that, as you were saying all of it initially, I was like, oh, wait a second. Like, Grubauer's already having to play a lot of hockey now, not going to get that break. That could be a problem. So sorry for interrupting. I just thought that was something we should talk about.
No, that's a very good question, and certainly very relevant for the Kraken.
Yeah.
So the next and kind of the last, sure thing as far as making the national team is Alex True from Denmark, who just played his first game for the Kraken against Columbus on Saturday. So, Alex True, he played for Denmark in their qualifying round games because they had to qualify for the Olympics. Kind of went down to the wire. It went down to the very last game. They ended up winning, so Denmark will be in the Olympic men's hockey tournament. He only kind of played a depth role on the national team, but as one of only a handful of actual NHLers, who are Danish and could make the team, I think he's pretty much a lock.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think he's a lock to make the team. It will be interesting to see what kind of role he takes on the team. Obviously, Alex True, we're not talking about a superstar caliber guy here. It's always interesting with those kind of qualifier teams, how they use kind of depth NHL players on their international teams, because, it's international competition. The hockey is a little bit different, right? Rinks a little different, all that stuff. So sometimes you'll use those depth guys still in depth roles, even though they are NHLers, and maybe some of the guys you've got ahead of them in a lineup aren't, just for those reasons.
And experience matters, and time with the national team. True is a younger guy, and also you're playing against, I think they were playing against Slovenia, South Korea, and Norway in their group, so little different level of competition.
For sure.
So anyway, that's the end of the sure things. Now we get into guys who I kind of mentioned before the season. Their play this year would impact their chances of whether they were going to the Olympics or not. And the Kraken had a few guys in that category, and I figured the most likely of them to start the season to make the national team was Jonas Donsk for Finland. And this is an interesting case because, his play this season was going to kind of decide whether he made the team or not. And how about his play this season? We've certainly talked about it a lot. He doesn't have a goal yet, Dylan, does he?
No, he really doesn't. Came unbelievably close. Just, in that most recent game against Columbus, I should say. Thought it was his goal. Super excited for him. Oh my gosh, I was just so happy. Bounced off Schwartz. It's Schwartz's goal. But yes, I mean, that brings up the big question, which is, he was probably, more so on the bubble. And it's hard to say what they'll do now because, and you and I kind of talked about this, off air, so to speak. If they've been watching him, I think they should still take him because he's still playing really, really well. He's creating offense. He's driving possessions. He's back checking well. He's doing everything that you could ever want a player to do. So if the Finnish scouts and coaching staff and stuff are scouting him, I think there's still a fairly decent chance that he can make it as, a depth player on their team. If they're going to kind of, look at everybody and kind of, just kind of look at stats first to kind of, weed some guys out, it is possible that he gets overlooked because of that, because the goals aren't there, because the counting stats just aren't quite there for him.
Yeah, agreed. And watching him, every game. You see the things that he brings, and he's still the same player kind of as he always was. He's come as advertised. He's just been incredibly unlucky from a goal scoring standpoint. But I do think that he's got a better chance to make the team than not. I think probably, the Finnish, scouts and everyone, they're probably familiar with him, given that, Donskoy is no stranger to representing his country. In the past. He's played for Finland in 2 World Junior Championships and a World Championship. He's been on the national team before. They should know kind of him and what he does. And, at least he's getting assists. So as far as the counting stats for points, are still okay. But I certainly think Team Finland could use what Donskoy brings.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing that I think probably would be the thing that pushes him over the edge is how well he is on special teams. Like, you can run him out there on a power play or the PK and, know that it's going to be okay. And
he's played significant time with the Kraken for both on the power play and the PK.
Exactly. And kind of looking at, the group of players that he's going to be in the mix with as far as being more so on the bubble, I think that could easily be a thing that pushes him over the edge ahead of some of these other guys that gets him on the team.
Yep. No, he definitely brings value in that respect. So moving on to, I guess, the next most likely, and it's a trio of Swedes on the Kraken, all vying for spots on Team Sweden. And I'll start with the guy who I think is most likely to earn that spot, and that's Adam Larson. I'm going to hand the floor to you here to talk about Adam Larson and why he should be on Team Sweden.
Right. I mean, I think we can all agree that he has been the most consistent Kraken defender, certainly in their, defensive zone. He's really been their stud back there. He's done everything you could hope for. We're starting to see more recently him get a little bit more active in the offensive zone and kind of flashing, that side of his game. Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it's tough. The Swedish teams always have a lot of depth at defense, right? Like, that is something they are very, very much known for. So I don't know, it's going to be tough for him to make the team. He's, represented the team several times in the past at international tournaments, but never the Olympics. So I think that kind of may be working against him too. Just, if the coaching staff and the front office kind of putting things together wants actual Olympic experience, that could be something that's a knock on him. But I think, again, it's kind of one of those, looking at guys that he'd be going up against as far as bubble guys, I think he's got the edge on some of these other guys. And I think, I mean, let's put it this way. Who would you rather have if your team's Sweden right now? Him or like Oliver Ekman Larson?
I'd rather have Larson. I'd rather have him.
Yeah, Adam Larson. I guess.
I'd rather have Adam Larson than Oliver Ekman Larson.
That's on me. Right. Like, I'd rather have him, Matthias Ekholm. Right? Like, I think the kind of more so two-way ability from Larson there. Rasmus Andersson. Again, I think Larson over some of these guys. So I think he can get the nod on them. Maybe he's not necessarily in a starting position. Maybe he's a bench player for Team Sweden. But yes, I think he's proven enough with the Kraken to be worthy of that spot and finally get that Olympic dream of his.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's done everything that you could really ask of him, to do to make his case. It's just going to be a matter of the competition. I think before the season, I marked the 2 that he might be competing with would be Hampus Lindholm and Erik Karlsson. Crazy to think Erik Karlsson, they're on a bubble spot, but that's where we're at right now. And personally, I'd take Adam Larson over those 2, given what he's done.
For sure. So who else do we have for Team Sweden?
Yes, so the next Swede is Alex Wenberg. So he's had some mixed results with the the Kraken this season. He's definitely someone who would have to impress, or would have had to impress so far to show that he belongs on the team. Sweden's also got some very good forwards. I mean, the idea was basically that this season going into it, Ron Francis said he wanted Alex Wenberg to play in the top 6. Historically, he hasn't been a top 6 player. But maybe if he played in the top 6 and kind of performed well and showed that he could do that, that he might be a fit for Team Sweden. I mean, I guess this is almost a referendum here on how the Wenberg experiment has gone in the top six, really. But what have you seen from him, and is it enough to make Team Sweden?
Yeah, obviously his pass first nature is something we are all very, very familiar with now. And, I talked about earlier, right? He was someone that was known kind of for two-way play, but we maybe haven't quite seen that defensive acumen that we were hoping for when they signed him. I've got questions about him and looking at, kind of the other guys he's going to be competing with for Team Sweden, particularly at center. I don't think he makes the Swedish Olympic team. Because I also think if you're taking him to play center. You're not going to take him and move him to wing.
No, I mean, you'd rather just grab a winger for, whatever you're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're taking him as a center if you are, and I just think there's too many other centers, for him to compete with there. I don't see it happening. And he really, I think that's one where the counting stats would really have to be something that knocks your socks off and be like, oh, wow, look at what he's done this season. Yeah. And I just don't think it's there.
No, it's really not there for him. And unfortunately for I think everybody involved, but I just think that's the situation.
And that's the nature of these Olympic teams, right? For these major countries, you're competing with a lot of very good players. This isn't like making an NHL roster. This is kind of like making an all-star team.
Mm-hmm.
It's no knock on you if you're not ultimately selected. A lot of very good players are left off these teams,
right?
Especially as we'll see a little bit later talking about Team Canada.
Yeah. Yeah, no, just being in the conversation, it means you're, a good player for a team like Team Sweden.
Yes. So now the final Swede that I highlighted at the start of the season, and you talk about being in the conversation. I think this might be a guy who's probably played his way out of the conversation. Mm-hmm. And that's Kalle Järnkrok.
Yeah.
And the whole thinking with that was, if you want someone who has a little more versatility, you can play all three offensive positions, and will chip in and score for you, occasionally. It's a kind of a well-rounded guy like that maybe they would consider Järnkrok as kind of a depth player to provide some depth scoring. But certainly this season, that scoring hasn't been there. It's been tough with him, landing on COVID protocol and, injury. It's just been a tough season for him. And it looks like I don't think there's any chance he makes Team Sweden.
No, again, it's such a deep team to begin with. You have to, if you're going to be one of those bubble guys and make the team, you really got to be playing very, very well, up to the Olympics essentially to get yourself on there. And yeah, I think, again, as you said, kind of for reasons not necessarily all of his own making, that just hasn't been the case so far this season.
Yep. So moving on to the last one that I mentioned, and this was probably the longest shot I thought there was, and not necessarily because he wasn't a good player, but when you're talking about Team Canada, mm-hmm. man, it's a competitive team. And Yanni Gourde, we mm-hmm. figured that he'd have a chance to maybe be a number one center with the Kraken this season, that he might come in and even potentially be their leading scorer if he came back early enough from the shoulder injury. He came back early, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't know. He's kind of settled into this, middle six kind of spot, more shutdown line kind of guy, like what we knew with him from Tampa. And I don't know, is that going to be enough to make Team Canada, do you think?
No, just because there's other guys that play like that for Team Canada already, essentially.
Yep.
You know what I mean? As far as those two-way centers, bottom six center guys, you're looking at, Ryan O'Reilly, Patrice Bergeron, Sean Couturier. You're going to take those guys over Yanni Gourde. And so that's just the way it is.
Exactly. Not a knock on Gourde, but it's just that simple. Canada has got an embarrassment of riches to choose from. And, you got to factor in Tom Wilson's getting a winger spot,
Yeah, exactly. Got to make sure everybody stays safe over there,
Yep. So that about does it for the players that I had listed going into the season. Any kind of wild card guys that you think have played their way into contention for the national team with the Kraken this season?
I don't know. It's hard because I the guys that have been playing well that I would, my first gut reaction was like for McCann. But again, you're talking Team Canada. Like you have to be playing so out of your mind.
You got to beat out maybe a Matt Barzal or a John Tavares, to get in that spot.
Exactly. And McCann's playing really well, but he's not playing that well. You know what I mean? So
yeah, it's really tough. I think that about about
Yeah,
covers it
yeah.
for Kraken players going to the Olympics.
Yeah, so obviously we'll keep our eye on everything as things develop. Will be exciting to see what happens, right? If the NHL still is going to go, all that stuff. The rosters, obviously, it's going to be fun to watch all the Kraken players play over there. The ones that do go, assuming they go. I think that's going to be a lot of fun to just kind of see them in a different setting. After everything, I just think it'll be kind of fun and refreshing and a little something different. We know that's what the Olympics are a lot of time, right? It's just a kind of a nice reprieve mid-season to see something a little bit different, but still enjoy hockey. And so that's what I always appreciate about it. Kind of real quick before we close out the podcast and stuff, just want to highlight some stuff. Obviously it's the holiday season, it's the season of giving, and just wanted to kind of give thanks to kind of both of our parents, our sets of parents. Start with your family, who gave us these awesome, and I know for those of you listening, I'm going to do my best to describe these on the audio version of the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, obviously you're kind of seeing what we're showing. It's a framed canvas print of us at the first game in Kraken history, first regular season game in Vegas there, along with our ticket stubs from that Vegas game and a Kraken logo and the ECH logo, just to kind of commemorate that occasion. And it was a very, very thoughtful gift. I was very surprised when I received it. Very, very thankful to both of your parents. So I want to say thanks once again to them for that, because it's, it is. You and I have been to a lot of sporting events, a lot of memorable things, and that is definitely, one of them for us that we're going to remember for a really, really long time. And it's really nice to have this to, kind of look back on it and all that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just great to be able to kind of look over there and remember that memory. It's just great. And thank you, Mom and Dad. I really appreciate it. It was a surprise when I got it. Just got it in the mail, and it was really cool to see.
For sure. And then from that wonderful gesture from your parents to the both of us, to a wonderful gesture from my mom to you. I wasn't involved in this. She crocheted you this awesome Kraken stocking that you're showing off here.
Look at that.
Yeah, got the skate with the blade, the laces, and then obviously the the actual stocking sock from the Kraken there. My mom has made these for us in family for years. Always had our favorite teams done. I have my Penguins one still, but I don't have one of these awesome Kraken ones like you have.
Yeah, and she got the colors to match perfectly. I mean, I think you were telling me about, going out and trying to find the right color match. I mean, it just goes great.
Yeah, so obviously we know you're my mom's favorite. You get that out of the way, but
give her a little less trouble not living in the house,
Yeah, probably has something to do
over the
with
years,
it. A lot of it probably. So yeah, that one's also pretty cool, and we've been thinking about, because she likes to make these, so we've been thinking about, obviously we just reached 3,000 followers on Twitter, maybe making that part of a giveaway or something. So if anybody's interested in one of those, reach out to us, let us know on Twitter. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment about it, because that's definitely something we could get done probably.
Yeah,
you too can have a Kraken stocking before I do.
Yeah, exactly. Get one before Dylan. Once Dylan gets them, you won't want one anymore.
Exactly. The cool factor goes out the window. So, all right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Emerald City Hockey Podcast. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us for another one of these. Another great week of Kraken hockey to look forward to. Obviously, this upcoming Tuesday against San Jose, that game, if you are a member of the Patreon, you could expect to find the link to the live commentary video that we're going to be doing for that you can come join us with. If you're not already a member of the Patreon, go check that out. You can links to it kind of everywhere for us. And you can join with us before that Tuesday game, so you too can watch the game with us. And we had a lot of fun on that test one we did in that Tampa Bay game. I thought it went really well.
Yeah, that was a great time.
Yeah, so that should be a lot of fun. And then the next day, Anaheim, chance for a revenge game there for us. I'll be at that game down here in Anaheim. That should be a lot of fun. I know there's a couple people who've been, in the post games also going. If you're going, reach out to me. We can, meet up or something. Come say hi. And then at the end of next week, Edmonton again. That's going to be a lot of fun.
It'll be a fun rematch. Oh yeah.
And we said it last time. If there's going to be a big mascot reveal, that kind of is the one that makes the most sense. You get like a solid week of lead up of not having the team in the building, so to speak, to get ready for it. So that's really why I'm most excited for it.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'll be keeping an eye out there.
Yeah, so that's what's on the docket for the next week. Oh, and then Toronto on the 19th as well, next Sunday. So that one should also be interesting. See that media storm. I can't wait to see how many media members are in the building for that one, RJ. You get to tell me.
Oh yeah, going to be crowded up in the press bridge.
For sure. All right, so that's going to do it, everybody. Thanks for joining us once again. We will see you all next time.